Welcome to the Alcohol Addiction Podcast. I'm of course your host, Lee Davey, and today my very special guest is Greg Suchy. How are you doing, Greg?
Doing great. How are you doing?
I'm good. Where do you live, Greg?
I live in Northeast Ohio, in Akron,
Ohio,
in the United States.
And what's it like living in Ohio?
I kind of like it. I know especially the last couple of winters haven't been that cold, so it's almost turning into Florida.
I'm not very good with my kind of like American geography, so I wouldn't know if Ohio is hot, cold. I wouldn't have a clue.
Ohio's on the northern side by the Great Lakes, almost to Canada.
Cold then.
Yeah, we usually have cold winters.
Okay. And so you ended up in AA in June 2012, right? Is that correct?
Yes.
So let's start from there. How did you end up in AA?
I actually initially ended up in there to support my wife because I came home from work on June 23rd, I think it was, and I found her in her easy chair. I couldn't find a pulse. She had slit her wrists. She was covered in vomit. She drank most of the booze in the house and took all our pills and all kinds of stuff trying to end it all. And I couldn't find a pulse, and I really thought she was dead. So I took her to the emergency room, and we spent 8 or 10 hours there trying to get her to, her blood alcohol level down. And when she finally woke up in the hospital, she didn't recognize me. She had no clue what was going on, and it was pretty scary. And they ended up sending her to a 3-day psychiatric evaluation center. And it was during that process that they talked about her going to AA. And the counselor there said that it would be great if I supported her, if I showed up as her support. So that's how I started in AA, because she was the kind that when she drank, she got really angry and violent. And I pretty much I like to joke around and play and have fun. So to me, I could point at her and say, I'm not that bad, so I must not have a problem at all. You know what I mean? But after a couple of weeks of going to meetings with her and supporting her, and I kind of heard a few too many stories that I related to, and started reading the big book a little bit and started thinking maybe I might have a problem. And it was funny, the very day that I had that thought that I might have a problem, I ran into somebody. In fact, I got a tap on the shoulder and said, "Hey, Greg, SOB, it's about time you got here." And I turned around. It's a guy that used to own a gas station that I bought alcohol off his employees, and it had shut down like 12 years earlier for, with no warning or anything. So I had no clue what had happened to him. Apparently that was when he'd gotten sober. And in the almost 4 years that I spent in the rooms of AA, he was the only person that I ever ran into that I knew beforehand. So it was really strange that he showed up on that exact night when I just started thinking maybe. But so that started my journey in AA. He became my first sponsor. I ended up having 3 sponsors, but he became my first sponsor, and we started working on that first step. And the whole powerless thing never really made sense, because I always felt like there was some sort of choice there. Even though I still went way overboard and went beyond where I would plan on stopping, it always felt like in some way there was a little bit of choice there. But long story short, I ended up switching from him because he had this 1-year plan for the steps, and I didn't really want to take that long. And so I switched to another sponsor who was going to take me through them within a month's time, which sounded more like what I was looking for. But what happened in between there in the meantime was on actually right at my 5-month sober anniversary in November 25th of 2012, I went to that's Thanksgiving Day here in the U.S. And in Akron, they have what's called a gratitude meeting, where they lease out the gymnasium in a school, and we have 200 to 300 people show up, and everybody gets 30 seconds to say what they're grateful for, and then it goes on to the next person. So it was this really beautiful experience, over an hour of just people showing gratitude. So you can imagine the energy in that room was just wonderful. And at the end of the meeting, it's traditional around here for everybody to join hands and say the Lord's Prayer, the Our Father. And as soon as I touched hands with the people next to me, the physical world went away. I was no longer there in a physical form. And what I saw was the energy of everything. I saw the oneness of literally everything. I could see the energy that made up the people and the energy that made up the chairs and the walls, and everything was all the same. And even in between everything, there was this energy, like a lighter form of energy where, the air is. There's still energy in between. And it left me with this feeling that everything's already okay. And that there's no need to strive for anything. And that was the day that the desire and the need to get drunk and high to escape my world went away. I mean, after that point, it was no longer an issue. And I felt wonderful until I started talking to people in AA, trying to find out what had happened, see if anybody kind of knew what I'd experienced. Because at the time, I had no way to put it into words at all. I mean, even to this day, it's still very difficult. What I just told you just doesn't even really touch it. But the main answer I got from a lot of people was that what I felt was dangerous, because I shouldn't be so happy at 5 months sober, and especially since I hadn't actually worked the steps yet.
How did that make you feel?
It really left me questioning whether or not AA would be the place for me, but I didn't know of anything else at the time. And, AA is I will say this, I don't have anything against AA. I think it's a wonderful program for giving people some sober time, but it left me sitting there at meetings going, what now?
Yeah,
What's next?
It reminds It reminds me a little bit of, I've been doing some CBT training recently with David Burns and his team in America, and David Burns talks about a lot of his patients who don't really want to do the work for whatever reason, generally resistance, but they want to pay a therapist just so they can come and talk to them. And David Burns often says, but that ain't gonna help you get better. Just talk. But there are therapists out there who would love nothing more than to just listen to somebody talk it. Like, how easy is that? Like, I've got Greg for an hour today. Greg's gonna pay me $500, and Greg's gonna talk, and I'm gonna listen. And at the end, I'm gonna have someone else who's gonna come in. And I like the way that David turns around and says, "No, I want to help people. I don't want to just listen to them." And sometimes I get that. I've never been to an AA meeting, but sometimes I get that feeling that it could go on and on and on and on and on, and nobody's actually getting any better. They're not fixing themselves as fixing themselves is the wrong word. I guess people aren't finding themselves or becoming attuned to the fact that the way out is to just embrace their authentic self and who they are, rather than try to be what the whole world wants them to be. So that's what I thought about when you said that right in that moment. I mean, are you a believer that with your experience in AA? Well, I guess you just answered your own question, but what came up for me was, do people have to do the steps? I guess you're saying they don't, right?
I don't think it's necessary at all. And it's not just my opinion. If you look at the big book, what it talks about, it says that honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness are indispensable. And it says that the steps are suggested. And somehow that has gotten flipped.
Mm.
And the main focus is on the steps. And as a result, people have, for the most part, have stopped having spiritual awakenings because of it.
Mm-hmm.
Those steps were not there for the first 100 men and women that, were there for the writing of the big book and all the beginning and everything. What was there was Bill Wilson.
Mm.
He had a spiritual experience, a spiritual awakening that was very profound. And just by being in his presence, people would benefit from that. And he, it was 2 years in, I think it was, when he started writing the big book. Excuse me. And you got to figure that's a couple years of not working the steps, right?
Yeah.
Because they weren't there. They didn't exist. The steps were Bill Wilson's best attempt at helping other people have the same experience that he'd had.
Yeah, I get a similar. I get where he was coming from, right? I imagine when I gave up drinking alcohol, I looked around me and I saw so many people suffering the same way that I used to, but not even knowing that they were suffering, which is even worse than knowing you're suffering, I think. And I really wanted to help them. But the first thing I then had to figure out was, how can I help them? How did I quit? How did it work? What is the methodology? People need steps or rules or lists. It's the way that we've been programmed to learn things through our academics. So I can imagine Bill was thinking to himself, wow, I've tried everything to quit drinking. It didn't work. Now I've quit. How do I teach people this? And the steps are born, right? And for people listening to this who might be might turn this podcast off because they're thinking of AA and they're very averse to AA. We need to be mindful here that if someone has an alcohol issue and suddenly they go to an AA meeting and they go through these steps and it works for them, why would we expect them to do anything else other than try to teach those steps? To them, it works. Like, my system works. And someone going through the steps, it works. What worked for you, Greg, works. And then we try to put that out there into the world. And I guess what we've got to do, and I'll ask your opinion on this, we've just got to be a little bit careful about our own dogma and about trying to believe that our way is the only way, which is, I know, something that I battle with. That puts me off AA, but also puts me off myself sometimes. What do you think about that?
No, I totally agree. I can't predict what's going to work for somebody. But in my research, the numbers that I find for the effectiveness of 12-step programs is between 3 and 11%. I mean, AA won't participate in a study, so people have to go in and kind of be sneaky about it. But I noticed that there was, I went every day for a couple of years, almost 3 years. A meeting a day, sometimes 2 or 3 meetings in a day, just because it was the only thing I knew. And when I was introduced to the 3 principles of mind, consciousness, and thought, suddenly that experience that I had at 5 months sober made some sense. And I didn't feel this need to go to the meetings so much. And for a while, I went just to see the people that I used to hang out with and, just to socialize. And the meeting part itself wasn't quite the thing I went for. You know what I mean? It was just a secondary thing.
I guess.
After a while, I just stopped going for about 6 months. And when I went back, I was amazed at how few of the people I actually recognized.
Right.
It's one of those things, it hit me at that point that I didn't see how many people were coming and going because I was so focused on the people that I had decided to hang out with. Yeah. And I just became oblivious to what was going on around me. And I think that's part of what's happening. And again, AA can be very effective for people. If it works for somebody, that's perfect. I mean, why would you need something else if you found that it works? Don't keep seeking if something works.
No.
But for the people that it doesn't work for, there are other options. There are other ways to go about it. And one of those may be the more effective one for you. So if you find yourself in any program, whether it's 12 steps or otherwise, and it's just not working for you, then find something else. Mm-hmm. We have this beautiful thing called the internet where you can research all that you want and you can find stuff.
I think the things that come up for me in what you just said there in the last 2 minutes that I want to elaborate on a little bit for people listening. One, okay, we've got AA, we've got the steps, so we've actually got a methodology that's going to help me quit alcohol, which people are really interested in because they've tried willpower, they've tried saying, right, this is enough, that there's been attempts on their life, they've lost people, all this type of stuff, and they cannot quit. And then someone comes along and says, well, we've got this methodology that works. So you want to buy into that and believe that. But there's also a part of AA, which is community. So if you're trying to give up an addiction on your own, that's really tough. But if you suddenly find a load of people who are like you and you can be your authentic self around them, or what you believe your authentic self is, then that community is really important. So I imagine when you then have a spiritual awakening and you no longer need that environment, it's still difficult to leave because they are the only people who have a clue what you're going through. And even they don't understand your spiritual awakening. But so there's the community aspect you don't want to leave. I should imagine as well, the other thing that come up for me then was there's a lot of peer pressure, either created by the community or just fabricated in your own mind behind, almost like you're having an affair. Like, I've just learned about the 3 principles, which means I'm now being unfaithful to the 12-step program. And I can't talk to these 12-steppers about it because they will look at me like, what the fuck are you doing? Are you leaving us by being indoctrinated into someone else? What do you think about those things I just said about?
It was definitely, it was a strange period of time for me when I first came across the 3 principles. It really was, because it was something, like I said, that finally made sense of everything. Mm-hmm. And real quick, I did spend the first year after I found the principles trying to prove them wrong, and I couldn't find a single instance. Mm-hmm. So, I kind of got stuck in that, but not really stuck, but it's a wonderful thing. But what I initially did was I thought, holy crap, here's the answer. Let me go back to AA and say, hey guys, I found something that could be more effective for people. And I was greeted with a lot of anger, even from people who I thought were my friends the whole time and would be open-minded to something, were very much, the word stuck keeps coming to mind, but I don't think that's really it. But kind of like stuck in that mind frame of this is the only way, this is the only thing that works. The big book tells me so, all the people in these meetings tell me so. So people show up to AA and they get involved in this fellowship. And there's a lot of people around who are very supportive to new people and greet them and give them tips and hints and all kinds of stuff. And so at first, it actually, for most people, feels pretty wonderful when they find AA. There's this relief. I can go to this place. I can find a different place every night, go there and hang out with people who are like-minded. And everybody, addicted or not, everybody wants to hang out with people who are like-minded. That's just part of being human. We like that connection, that interaction with people who are on a similar mind frame as we are. And so that part of it I found really wonderful. It was the program side that is really lacking. It's very dry. There's really not much to it anymore. It's just, let's get through these steps. And if that didn't work, do the steps again.
And again,
and if that didn't work, do the steps again.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I in the time that I was in there, I only did them twice because I didn't see the point. I mean, even the first time I went through them, I'd already had that experience, and the amazing thing was all of my resentments dropped away. So when it came time to do my inventory, I didn't really have stuff to put on there. It was like, I'm sitting there trying to write this like I'm not really angry at people anymore. I don't know why at the time. Now I understand it quite a bit better, but at the time I had no clue why I wasn't angry at people anymore. So it was strange for me to have to go through this process and try to overcome something that wasn't there.
Let me ask you a question about the moment when you held hands and you had your spiritual awakening, epiphany. Let's not put names. We don't have to put labels on it, but it was an amazing, life-changing experience for you. Have you ever seen the movie The Matrix?
Yes.
Do you remember when at the end of the first one, when suddenly Neo wakes up from being shot and he looks and the world physically looks different? It's not the world anymore. It's like code. When you had your experience and you said you looked and the world was different, are you talking that physically it looked different or it felt different to you?
While I was having that experience, physically it looked different. It was, that is actually a pretty good example from that movie. I forgot about that part, where he saw the code on the walls and everything was the same code.
It was the same stuff. So he sees.
That's kind of what I saw. Except
he sees the lights.
Code.
Doesn't he? He sees the lights on the wall. He sees the wall. He sees the door. He sees the people, but they're not. They're silhouettes, and what he sees is energy. Is that what you were seeing? Yeah.
Right. I just saw energy. It was light. It was like when you see an arc flash from electricity, that bright flash. That's what everything was, but it was swirling, it was moving, it was always changing. And the energy was actually flowing from one thing to another. So one person to the next person, to the next, to the chair, to the floor, to the wall. And yet each thing held it wasn't really form, but it was its own shape of energy. Its own, and some people were actually different levels of brightness and slightly different hues of colors and stuff. And it was really interesting. What it left me with, the feeling that changed was, like I said, I suddenly wasn't really angry all the time anymore. And that was something for years. That was my thing. I was the angry guy. Everything upset me and everybody was out to get me and make me mad and piss me off. And, that's just the way that I lived life up until that point. And then literally everything, I said, the best way I've heard it put is nothing has changed, but everything's different.
Was that
my circumstances?
Was that moment when you saw the energy? Was it a brief moment, or is it and then it went and you've never recovered that, or do you now look at the world and there's still something different about it?
There's still definitely something different about the world. I don't see quite as much of the energy anymore, but since then I feel energy. And I've talked to people who are into auras and stuff like that, and what they describe that they see describes what I feel.
I was at a vegan fair the other day, and Liza, my wife's friend Susie, was there, and we were talking to her, and she was explaining to us the moment in her life when she saw the world differently and started to see the energy of the world, and she explained what she sees in very roughly the same way as you've just explained it. And I want to talk to people listening here now. Unless you've gone through that experience that Greg has gone through and my friend Susie have gone through, unless you've gone through that experience, what Greg is talking about now could feel to you like he's talking about meeting an alien civilization. It could be that counterintuitive to you that you will start to think to yourself, what a crock of shit, right? And when I spoke to Susie the other day and she was explaining this to me, my natural inclination, the foundation of who I am, went to what a crock of shit. And then I stopped myself and said, Lee, you have no idea how this world works. None. Zippo. You just have your own little worldview, like the other 7 billion people have their worldview. And how can you tell people to keep an open mind about quitting alcohol and using different theories if you can't keep an open mind that maybe there's something here that I haven't experienced that somebody else have? And just because I haven't experienced it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So if you're listening to this, everybody, right, we need to keep an open mind about everything until there is some empirical evidence that suggests otherwise, in which, in this case, what Greg's talking about, there isn't any. So you've got to keep an open mind. And just because it didn't work for you or it didn't happen to you doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Equally, I don't think this is something you can go searching for. I beat myself up regularly, say, where's my fucking epiphany? Why haven't I had my epiphany? You know, it doesn't work like that. In anything, I think if you're searching for it, like I seem to be doing, you're less likely to get it. So if you are thinking right now,
I agree, because when you're looking for it, you're holding a story about it.
Yeah,
you're holding, what I mean by story is just like a thought pattern, like you're holding your consciousness in a certain place, and when you do that, you're likely to miss out on everything else. I can guarantee that every person on the face of this earth at some point or another has had a spiritual experience and didn't recognize it. Mm-hmm. Maybe it was when you saw the most beautiful sunset of your life and you were just in awe, and all the thinking dropped away and all the feelings dropped away, and you were just there 100% present in that moment, just soaking in that sunset. Or for some people, it's the birth of their child or something like that. Everybody has had an experience, but we're taught that those things are just normal. And in a way they are, because that's our true selves. Mm-hmm. But the way we're taught it is that it's normal in like this physical world, where the empirical research can be useful and stuff. But what I'm talking about is in the formless world, in the world of spirit. And there's laws that apply in that world, just like we have laws that apply in the physical world, like gravity. Gravity is neutral. It doesn't care if you're standing upright or falling flat on your face. It just does what it does. Mm-hmm. And nobody really understands gravity. Even the physicists, they'll admit that they don't know what it is. But we can measure it, and we can come to understand it better, and we can experience it. Mm-hmm. And through that experience, we were able to come up with things like airplanes and skyscrapers and long bridges and stuff like that. But we still don't know what gravity is. Mm-hmm. And it's the same with what I found in the 3 principles with mind, consciousness, and thought. They are on the spiritual side. The same idea. They're neutral.
Right. Let me stop.
That comes into my head.
Let me just stop you there, Greg, because there'll be people listening to this who don't understand what the 3 principles are. They won't know what we're talking about. So let's just segue into. I know I cut you off there, but let's segue back into what you were talking about, but begin by explaining what are the 3 principles and how did you find them out, so people have a brief understanding of what we're talking about.
Okay. Well, it was just about 2 years ago. For a couple of years, I've been going to a Unity church because I liked how they have a metaphysical view of the Bible and everything. So I liked that aspect of it. But what I really enjoyed was the different people and belief systems that were part of that congregation. And they have, countless meetings every week for all kinds of different stuff. If you're interested in anything, it's there. Mm-hmm. And I looked at the bulletin one Sunday, and it's all it said was new meeting, 3 principles, and it's first and third Thursdays at 7:30 p.m. And it didn't give any explanation, but I felt pulled to it. I felt called to it. And when I finally showed up for it, I meet this guy, Bob, who talks to me about these 3 principles of mind, consciousness, and thought, how they explain how we experience the world around us, and why, so many people are stressed out and anxious and addicted and all this stuff. And I'm just looking at him going, you're crazy. It can't be that simple. It can't just be that the three principles are, they're in the formless world, so they're very difficult to put into words. And the guy that discovered them, Sidney Banks, eventually settled on calling them the three principles. They'd had a few names before then, but he eventually settled on the three principles of mind, consciousness, and thought. Essentially, what they are. And first of all, don't pay attention to the words I'm saying. They don't mean anything. There's something they're pointing to. Mm-hmm. There's an energy behind it. And if you get a feeling from it, stick with the feeling and don't try to figure it out. Mm-hmm. Because the feeling is where the answer really is. Words are man-made and don't quite describe it. But best way I could really put it is mind is the source energy. Some people call it God. Some people call it, whatever they want. It's what we're all made out of. It's the thing that grows our fingernails and our hair, and we don't have to think about that. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's something that beats our heart. So that's. I like to leave it very simple because I don't want to rule out anybody who has religious beliefs, mm-hmm. because every major religion has the truth at its core. It's kind of mostly, in most of them, covered up by a lot of worship and circumstantial stuff. But at its core, all of them have the truth to them. So I keep that one generic because it doesn't have to exclude anything, any belief system. It's what's at the core. Mm-hmm. And then you're left with consciousness and thought. And we've heard those words used so many times. And with thought, it's not really talking about the content of thought. It's talking about that ability to think. Where do thought, that place where thoughts come from, where we don't have to choose what thoughts we're having. They just pop up. We have no choice over that. We can choose what we do with them once they're here, but, and then consciousness kind of acts like our special effects department. And whatever thought we decide to give energy to, it makes it real for us. And that's what explains how, people can walk out of the same movie theater with a different experience of that movie. Some people loved it, some people hated it. We all have separate realities. All of our preferences are built up from, our earliest age. Our parents teach us what's good and bad and right and wrong. And then we start learning from our own experience at some point, and then from our friends and school and everything. It all adds up to this collective experience of life, this conditioning that we really filter the world through. Mm-hmm. So I'm not seeing you right now. I'm seeing what I think of you. Mm-hmm. When I'm upset at the guy that cut me off on the highway, I'm not really upset that the guy cut me off. I'm upset that I had expectations that I wouldn't have to use my brakes. Or something, I wouldn't have to swerve to the side suddenly. So I had this story going on, and this thing didn't fit into my story, so now I'm upset.
Yeah.
And we walk around with these stories every day and try to fit everything into our story, the story of me. And we can't get rid of that story, but we can write a better one. That's my experience.
So let me just jump in there a second. So people listening to this who are saying, I'm drinking alcohol because my mother and father abused me when I was younger. I have low self-esteem. I feel socially awkward. Nobody likes me. My face is covered in acne. I hate the world. I just can't stop drinking because it's the only thing that numbs my pain and all that kind of stuff. All that stuff is stories that we are telling ourselves repeatedly, which creates our worldview, which then becomes our reality. But it's a load of nonsense, right? Because it's all external. It's not really who we are.
Exactly. It's all that outside-in mentality where the reality of it is we only ever experience the world from the inside out.
Right.
We only ever experience it through those filters.
Explain inside out and outside in, because that's another important thing, I guess.
Outside in would be the thing like my parents abused me, or the neighbor, the babysitter, somebody did something to me when I was a child.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, at the time, it was real and it hurt. The current pain from it, the current memory of it doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
It's a thought that's brought back into your mind, and consciousness makes it real.
Mm-hmm.
That's when people have flashbacks and nightmares and stuff. It seems so real. That's consciousness's job. That's its entire purpose. It's the special effects department. It's like the light bulb in the film projector. Whatever's held in front of it, it makes it real. It pops it out in front of you, and that's what you see on your screen. So with addiction, this is what I've come to understand since coming across the three principles is at some point when I was young, my earliest memories, I didn't feel like I fit in anywhere, even with my family. Nothing, there was nothing they did. That was just how I felt. But I started looking for reasons outside of me why I felt that way. And of course I'm going to find them. Whatever I'm looking for in this world, I can find it. It's there. So at some point, I just really started feeling really badly most of the time. And by the time I was 12, it got to the point where I felt I needed to do something about it. And so when I was 12 on New Year's Eve, I stole a few beers from my parents while they were having a little party with some people. And I snuck away to the basement in a dark corner, and I drank those 3 beers, and each one I put down relieved that feeling a little bit. And by the time I had that third one, I didn't feel like that anymore. I felt pretty good. So we start using this stuff innocently, and it works for a short time. But here's what happened. I mean, sure, at 12, I'm not going to necessarily become a daily drinker or anything. Some people do, but I didn't have access to it all the time. So I drank when I could, but in between, I found out that eating a bunch of junk food would give me a similar feeling. It would give me some relief. And so started my issues with food. So now I've got alcohol and food. And that continued up until I was about 20 or so. Definitely when I turned 21 and was able to buy my own booze. But that was about the point when I started using alcohol and food on a daily basis, regularly, just to get by. It wasn't even to feel good anymore. And what I see happening is our brains are really good at efficiency. They're really good at figuring out problems and finding a solution to it, okay? So the problem is my brain only knows the solutions I give it. It can't figure out things that aren't already in there. It's like a computer. You can't play a program, you can't run a program that's not loaded into the computer. Mm-hmm. So what I really believe happened is my brain looked at it and said, okay, well, here's this feeling that I don't really like to feel. And here's this solution. So every time I feel that coming on, I'm going to go ahead and reach out for this solution. And after a while, the brain is so good at it, it becomes a preventive thing. Where it starts saying, you know what, I really don't like feeling that way so much that I'm going to just go ahead and get drunk right now, even though I'm not feeling that way, because then I can prevent feeling that way in the first place. And for me, I believe that's that imaginary line into what we call alcoholism. It's not a disease, it's a habitual thought pattern. It's something that I've entertained so many times that it became a subconscious thought pattern. And that's that powerlessness part. It's not really powerless. We're not powerless. It's an automatic thought pattern. And as long as it remains a subconscious thought pattern, it's going to seem like we're powerless over it. It's going to seem like we don't have a choice.
I want to...
Does that make sense?
It does. It does. It does, sort of. So I'm going to recap a little bit what you said there, and then I'm going to end with a question. I've interviewed now, I think you're going to be maybe interview number 85, maybe. And that doesn't count all the other conversations that I have outside of this forum with people. And there's one thing I know for sure, is it is very unusual in this world for anybody to go through life and not feel that they didn't fit in when they were going towards their teenage years. Very few people in this world don't feel different. So if you're listening to this thinking, oh, one of the reasons I drink is when I was younger and I was growing up, I didn't feel like I fit in, join the club. It's like, it's got to be a part of the human condition. And the best way that I myself have understood this is by reading about Jeremy Griffith, who I talk about a lot on this podcast. He's a biologist from Australia. He wrote The Species of Denial and a book called Freedom, where he talks about I have a 5-month-old daughter next door who has not been contaminated by the world, who just smiles at me all the time. She is beauty at her essence. She is beautiful at her core. She's loving. She's caring. The world has not affected her. And she will be that way for a long time. And then at some point, just before you reach your teenage years, the world starts to invade her mind. The contaminated thinking starts to get into her. And she now starts to have this battle in her mind between where she is at her essence and who she is as a human being at a conscious level, and how the world wants her to be. And the world doesn't want her to be her true self. And she is so scared of being different, even though she doesn't want to be like everybody else. She has to. And now she gets into this, I don't feel like anybody else. But of course she doesn't, because she's trying to be someone she's not. And that's why a lot of people start using her stuff. So that was what I was getting when Greg was saying that. And I see it a lot in addiction. The one question I wanted to ask you is the reason I quit drinking alcohol is because I realized I had told myself a story that alcohol, and when I consumed it, it created value for me. When I realized that it didn't, that the value was an illusion, and I'm going to give you a quick example of that, folks. Let's say I think that going to the pub to watch a football game with my friends, I cannot do that without drinking alcohol, because it's the alcohol that is providing the social lubricant and making the night interesting and fun. It's an illusion. The interesting and fun part is the game and my absorption in it, and my conversation and communication and connection with the people in that pub who I'm talking to, which, by the way, you can't have if they're drunk. Right? So the actual fact that I got a beer in my hand is an illusion. That is not making me feel good, right? So once I learned that, Greg, I was able to quit, right? So I teach people, change the way you think. Learn to see that alcohol is not providing you with value. But when I spoke to Mary Schiller the other day and interviewed her about this, and when I've spoken to Jamie Smart about this, they say to me, no, you don't have to change your thinking. You just have to be who you are. And I guess this is where I'm struggling a little bit. So if you can help me get out of this quicksand, because like I say, I think I've got something here. I think I've got a methodology. I think I've got a way of thinking differently. I think I've nailed it. And Jamie's saying, no, you're not getting it.
Let me say that is heading in a better direction than doing nothing.
Yeah.
But the problem with techniques like that is that they only work when you're doing them. So as soon as you stop reminding yourself of it's a subconscious thought pattern. So as soon as you stop reminding yourself, next thing you know, you're going to find a beer in your hand.
Well, that's not true.
So
that's not true, because let me just interject there 1 second. Once I realized that there was no value, once I realized it and got it, and this came just me reading a book, so it wasn't like months or years of training or anything. Once I got it, I've never ever wanted to drink again. I've never had a craving, never had a desire. So for me, I didn't have to keep reinforcing it. It just happened to me. A bit like your spiritual awakening. But
that's because it wasn't the book, it was you.
Right.
That's because you had an insight. That was a spiritual experience. They don't all have to be, white light burning experiences. Many of them, most were what I call popcorn experiences. They just pop up little things, suddenly things look a little different. You may not even notice that they look different until later on. You had an insight. You had a true spiritual experience.
Okay. Let me
where
stop.
you saw.
All right. So I read a book. I read this book. I had a spiritual awakening or an insight, and because I was reading this book when I had it, I believed that it was the book and not me.
Right.
Okay. So
exactly.
All right. I understand that.
And at first, when I had my experience at that meeting, at first I thought it was because of the meeting.
Right.
But what I've come to understand was that it was because at that point in time, for whatever reason, because of that energy of the gratitude and all that, whatever you want to call it, I was willing to let go of my story for just a moment. To me, that's what that real open-mindedness and willingness is about, is the being willing and open to having a new experience of life, to understanding that what I believe now may be wrong. It probably is. Even now, for me personally, where I'm at now, even though it's light years better than what it was 5 years ago, I'm still probably wrong about this experience of life. And to me, that's a beautiful thing.
You're like this. Remember I said...
Because as long as I...
Sorry, do you remember I said...
as long as I hold on to that idea, every day keeps getting a little bit better. And it's not that my circumstances are necessarily changing. I'm still pretty broke right now. I'm still a full-time college student working full-time, and I'm tired. But I don't have to be in a bad mood because of that. I don't have to have negative thinking because of that. Because thoughts are neutral. And when that thought pops into my head, maybe I should quit school because I'm tired and this is getting to be too much, I don't have to entertain it. It's not my thought. Just because a thought's in my head doesn't make it mine. It's just a thought.
All right, let me...
And I did...
Sorry.
Quick thing. I didn't do anything to make that thought come in, and I don't have to do anything to make it leave.
Okay.
And it's the same with those thoughts about drinking and drugging and whatever. We don't have to do anything about them to make them go away. The best thing to do is not give them any energy.
All right, let me ask you about that then. Before I do, I mentioned David Burns earlier on, the CBT guru. You'd like David, because David turned around and said to me, Lee, everything we think we know about psychotherapy today is wrong. So even though he's teaching these techniques, he knows that history says we have not got a clue really what we're capable of, what is happening here, but we're doing the best we can right now with what we've got, right? Okay, so I'm jutting in all the time because I know I'm short for time and this is really important. But so I read this book. I believe this book helps me quit alcohol. I then say to people who want to quit alcohol, just read the book. Millions of people read it and get it. Millions don't. I think what we're saying here is millions of people, while they read it, are having a similar insight of their own, not mine, their own, and they're relating it to the book. Millions of others aren't having that insight, right? So I guess my question then becomes, how do you teach somebody who wants your help to quit alcohol? How do you help them do that when you yourself had an insight? Because you can't just say to someone, well, you need to have a spiritual awakening. You need to have an insight. How do we jump from someone wanting to help, someone wants Greg's help, someone wants Lee's help? Where do we go?
Quite honestly, because I have some coaching clients right now that I'm working with on recovery, and I coach for free. So I don't believe in the people charging $250 an hour or something. But when I sit down with somebody, Sid talked about the only way you can share this is to share your insights and hold that space. And the space he's talked about is a space where that energy comes from, that space where the formless turns into form. where, you know, thoughts become thoughts and then become actions and whatnot. There's that space there. And in that space, everybody is perfectly mentally, emotionally, and psychologically well. And if I hold that space while I'm just listening to the person, the vast majority of the time, I don't have to actually say anything to them. It's like you reading that book. You were in an open space when you were reading that book. And it just happened to be the time something in there struck something inside of you, because that's the only way an insight can happen, is when something inside of you resonates with it. So at some point, they'll be talking and they'll be sharing their story. And I've seen this, and they've got the, you know, the tight face, and life is so damn serious, and this recovery thing is just such a serious business. And then suddenly they'll see it differently, because I'm not feeding into their energy. I'm holding my energy of love and well-being for them, and I don't have to say it to them. In fact, I find it's better not to, especially when I'm working with women. telling some woman you just met that you love her, kind of, it tends to have negative effects. But it's really about sharing your own insight. And by sharing your own insight, they may resonate with it. But not everybody that comes to me is going to find freedom from their addictions. And it's not anything wrong with me or them. It's just that we don't resonate together. For you, it was the book. For me, it was that meeting in AA. For somebody else, it's a sunset. For somebody else, it's the birth of their child. For somebody else, it's nothing. They're sitting there watching a McDonald's commercial on TV, and suddenly they see everything differently. There's nothing we can do to make them happen. But there is something we can do to make them more likely to happen. And that is to not be so adamant about our story of who we are. Be willing to let go of that, even for a moment. Be willing to be wrong. It's the most wonderful thing to be wrong. I'm wrong every day. It's awesome. It's really a cool experience to be wrong and just be like, cool. Now I can learn from it. Now I know what's wrong, and now I have a better idea of what's right. And I say a better idea because I don't know. Who really knows what's right? We've made this all up anyway. Collectively, as a society, we have this huge story that's been made up over time. So there's just story after story, and it's a matter. The process of finding freedom from alcoholism, addiction, whatever you want to call it. I don't think any of those really exist except in our word. But the process of finding freedom from that is not about finding something new, and it's not about adding something to you. It's about letting go. And that's what I really believe the 12 steps were designed to do initially, was to help people let go of all their crap. And by letting go of that, you become open to a new experience. And the new experience is always there, because what I experienced that day was me. I didn't experience anything else except for myself, and peace of mind and serenity are our natural state of being when we stop doing the things that take us away from it. We will naturally return there when we stop doing the other stuff.
I guess
so. Let go of the story.
People are just so afraid to do that, right? They're just so afraid to let go. Let's try and put this in a more concrete way to help people, because every time I get into this conversation of 3 principles, I do always think that people are listening and they're confused, and they're especially because of the simple nature of it. You must have times, even today probably, when a thought enters your mind, which in the old days would have led to you maybe drinking or eating or something negatively. How do you deal with that thought now? What happens? It enters your head, and how do you deal with it?
I let it go. As weird as that sounds, I mean, it's just because it came in doesn't mean I have to look at it and give it attention. There's the thought about the food, and see what the funny thing is that the less I entertain those thoughts, the less often they happen. And that's been my most recent thing. The last thing that was kind of holding on for me was the food issue. And about 4 months ago, that all changed. And I've lost 30 pounds, was that about 14 kilograms or something since then, with no effort on my own. I'm not avoiding chocolate cake. And if I find myself eating a piece of chocolate cake, I don't beat myself up over it. It's just a piece of cake. It doesn't mean I have to start all over. It doesn't mean I'm a screw up. It just means I had a piece of cake. And in the past, I would have taken that, oh shit, that guilt that, you know, I had a piece of cake, and I would have had a whole cake. So that's, to me, another thing that helps with like the drinking is, if you find yourself having a drink, don't beat yourself up over it. Just get back on the path you want to be on. If you beat yourself up, then that one drink is going to turn into 20. Because you're adding more thoughts on top of it. You're adding more of the guilt, the shame, the remorse, all that stuff. And thinking, and when I finally decided to leave AA, I was riddled with guilt and shame. Because in AA, if you're not in AA, you're back out. So I knew that everybody in there would think I was back out. But I have to do what's best for me.
I think I get it. It's a process that I go through every day, where I see in myself small incremental changes. I think I've been looking for a light switch, and that's not been happening. There's a dimmer switch. And as I read more and learn more and bump into people like yourself and James Smart and Mary Schiller and even reading this book, over time, I'm slowly getting more comfortable dropping more and more stuff. But it doesn't come easy to me. Right. It's something that is practice. It's almost like a Zen Buddhist monk doesn't just go into the hills and he's a Buddhist. He's there for 30 years before he finally gets it. And you know, like you said, when you went to the AA meeting, you didn't, with your sponsor, you didn't want to do this for a year. You wanted to do it a lot quicker. But I guess each to their own, right? I think people just need to be more patient with themselves. Greg, is that about right?
Yeah, it's really, I mean, don't ever feel like you're less than anybody else ever. And especially when you hear of somebody else having some big experience. That's available to everybody at any moment. That person just happened to have one. There's nothing special about them. There's nothing special about me for the experience I had in 2012. I just happened to have one that day. And since then, I've had much smaller ones. It's been more of that gradual thing since then. For most people, it's more of that gradual thing. There's nothing wrong with that. Either way, you're heading in the same direction, and life is getting better. There's no need to have that big one, as nice as it is. It's not necessary.
Can I ask you a question? It's just popped into my head. I think it's always been there, but I've never really spoke to anyone about it. This is what's just come up for me, and I'll just blurt it out. It's not a question, it's not a statement. I'm just going to blurt it out. 7 billion people on this earth. God knows how many billion have already died. God knows how many billion are going to come. We're all the same. The only thing that makes us all unique is the outside-in worldviews that contaminate our thinking and makes us individual. But we're all the same. So we all have the power to do anything that we need to do within physical capabilities. Like, I'm never going to be an NBA basketball star, right? Because I'm not tall enough. But when it comes to the mind, we're all natural, pure, and the same. It's just how we react and hold on to the challenges and struggles we have in life that makes us different. And that's the key, I think.
Right. And we all have access to that divine wisdom, I guess you could call it. Those times when you're trying to figure out something and you just can't get it, And when you finally say fuck it and you let it go, later on the idea just pops into your head. The answer is just there. We all have access to that when we learn to relax. When we learn to not try to intellectualize and analyze everything. Just let it happen. Just let it flow. Things come and go. I mean, when in your past has a problem ever stuck around forever?
Well,
it just doesn't.
I read an email this morning, Greg. I'm a big fan of Bernadette G, where she's an Australian marketing and branding expert. And she wrote an email this morning that said she walked out of her house and she saw a Ferrari. And he really cranked on his accelerator and went for like 30 seconds. And then had to stop because this battered old crappy car was in front. And she said, that's what we're like. We just, we want to get going, but we don't own and occupy that lane. There's other people in there. There's other things in there that we need to coexist with and we need to think about. And sometimes when I read that, I was like, yeah, sometimes we need to be in that battered old car where we need to be on a horse, something that slows us down a little bit. So I think when I slow down and I can be more present or whatever you want to call it, the easier it is for me to filter through contaminated thinking. The faster that I'm moving, right? I got to get rid of Greg now. I've got to go and take my boy to the cinema. And I got to do. That's when stress, anxiety, worry starts to come in from contaminated thinking, right?
Right.
One last question for you, Greg, because I've got to go and contaminate my thinking with my boy. But for anyone interested in the 3 principles, what are the books, resources, or people you suggest that they take a look at?
Well, specifically with like addictions and habits, I haven't read all of them yet, but the 2 that I really like to recommend to people is The Serenity Principle by Joe Bailey and The Little Book of Big Change by Amy Johnson. Those are both excellent resources. The Serenity Principle talks a lot about, he really looks at AA through the mind frame of the 3 principles. So that one was really interesting for me to help it put into words what I'd been feeling about AA for years. It's not a terrible thing. It's become ineffective because the spiritual side is being left out. Then Amy Johnson's book gets into a little bit of neurobiology with it too, and it's not that neuroscience has it backwards. They look at what they see in the brain and call that the cause, but that's really the symptom. That's really the physical manifestation of what's happening. And she gets into that more, which is beautiful. That actually right after that was when I'd had the insight about food.
Right.
And I'd gone to her, she has a workshop that she does in Michigan where she lives. And I went to that. It was a 3-day workshop. And right around that time, I don't know which part it was, but something just clicked in. Right. And I had that insight about food. And, but if anybody wants to, I'm up for chatting with people. If anybody wants to chat, you can just look me up on Facebook. And I have a group on Facebook, Addiction, Alcoholism, and the 3 Principles. And through that group, I host a webinar every Sunday at 2 Eastern time, so in about 2 hours here. And we just started it. This will be the 4th one, and it's just been an amazing thing. We've got about 30 people every week. It's awesome. The energy to it is just awesome, and it's a conversation. It's not a typical webinar where you have an expert in front of you, because there's really no expert in this. We all have our own viewpoint. We all have our own camera that we're taking an angle from. Yeah. So nobody's right, nobody's wrong. Everybody's got their own view on it, and we're all trying to figure this thing out together. Yeah. That's the space I'm trying to create with these meetings that I host. So feel free to show up. Feel free to contact me. I'm always up for setting up times to chat with people. So.
Well, Greg, I'm a member of that group. I haven't spent a lot of time on it yet. I love what you're doing on there. There's a few more people from that group that I'm going to be interviewing shortly. So it's going to be interesting. If you're listening to this, folks, we're going to get a lot of 3 principles kind of led conversations over the next couple of episodes. I have got to shoot, Greg. I just want to say big thank you. I've personally learned a lot from this. I'm getting there. I'm getting there even more quicker after speaking to you, and I'm sure keeping in touch with you can help me a great deal. Things are making a lot more sense to me, and I just want to say a big thank you for putting yourself out there, helping people for nothing. I know how difficult that is, because I'm just actually veering away from that and trying to start charging people, and it doesn't feel right. But ultimately, if that's something I want to do full time, I've got to learn to live with that and change that outside in thinking. So thank you for that, and keep up the good work, Greg. Yeah, and keep in touch.
Yeah, thank you for asking. This was great. This was fun. Enjoyed it.